Welcome everyone. I'm glad to see everybody here. Thank you so much for coming. So, like Miriam said, my name's Jake, and I'm a cataloging librarian at Bronx Community College. I've been there for a few years, and for the past few months, I've been involved with a group of people there that have been talking about sort of the educational use of and kind of the general use of what a lot of people call artificial intelligence, stuff like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, all kinds of stuff like that. And the way I sort of first got involved with this is that, like many of you, probably, I was hearing back in November and December about all these news items about all these, all this ChatGPT stuff going on, and how it was this, you could do all these things that you sort of couldn't do before. And at first, my reaction was one of, I would say, horror. I'm sitting there with my bachelor's degree in English going, oh my God, people aren't going to know how to write things anymore. They're just going to have the machines do it for them. This is terrible. And then what sort of changed my mind about it was that about 5 minutes later, I look over at my wife, who's also working remotely with me that day, and she's trying to parse out this email that she's gotten for work that has been written in this totally incomprehensible style. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I lean over, I'm sort of looking at this email too, and then the thought occurs to me, maybe it's a good thing that there's a machine that can write things for people. And that's what turned me around on it. And so then I started thinking, all right, well, if people are going to be using this stuff, I should probably do what I can to help people use it constructively. And the first step in doing that is figuring out what they are. Now, this might be a little bit old hat for some of you, but ChatGPT and Bard and DALL-E are things what I like to call generative systems. And what is a generative system? Well, there's a few things that they sort of have in common. One of them is that the vast majority of them are what's called large language models. Now, what's a large language model? Well, what that is that these systems are, the word they like to use is trained. They're sort of used to observe, thousands and millions of different data points, and they sort of go over them over and over again until they're able to reproduce things that look like those data points. So like, for example, if you had a system that was absorbing all the works of Jane Austen, for example, and did it over and over and over again, then if you put something into it, it might come out with something that looks sort of like something Jane Austen would write. And it does this with all kinds of different informational points. And once it does that, they become what I call collators, which means that they're able to make inferences and connections between disparate data points in a way that might not be obvious to a different kind of system. So like, for example, if you had a system that had absorbed the works of Jane Austen and all of the Star Wars films, you might say to it, write a scene from a Star Wars film in the style of Jane Austen. And it would be able to make inferences between these two disparate information points. And the other thing is that these systems can be either generalized or very specific. Things like ChatGPT, they're what I call generalized, because you can just sort of put anything into them, and then it'll try and come up with something for it. Some of them are very specialized, and they're specialized in ways that I'm going to talk more about later, but they can be sort of designed for different purposes, so that to aid people in particular tasks. So I find that there are a number of advantages to using generative systems, the primary one of which is speed. The text ones, for example, can generate a fairly large amount of text in a fairly short amount of time. And it can do that without necessarily the end user needing to parse through all kinds of different kinds of data. Like if you just say for example, I just found out earlier today that somebody I know used ChatGPT to write their resignation letter for their job. And so she was able to do that in fairly short order, whereas maybe some of us might agonize about that sort of thing. I know I certainly did last time I had to. And similarly to that, they're very user-oriented. When you're doing a search using, say, a search engine or something like that, like Google, you often have to put in something that doesn't necessarily use naturalized language. Like you might put in like curry recipe or something in the hopes that it'll give you a particular kind of curry recipe. But whereas with a generative system, you can ask in a very natural language, like what's the best curry recipe for chicken or something to that effect. And then it will be able to recognize what you've given it, if it's working properly anyway, and then it can deliver something that not only is answered in sort of a conversational way, but also that you can follow up on. So that's what I mean when I say that they're both conversational or inferential. Because the neat thing about a lot of these generative systems, particularly stuff like ChatGPT, is that they will, and I use this in quotation marks, remember what you have given to it before, so that it's able to make inferences based on information you've given it before. Like if you follow up that curry recipe question with like, but I'm like, can you give me one that's gluten-free, for example? And then it'll remember, I'm talking about a curry recipe, and it also needs to be gluten-free now. It can make sort of a reference to that and follow up on that. Of course, there are also disadvantages to this sort of thing. The number one of which is they're inconsistent. So, first of all, you have to operate under the assumption that they'll actually work, because sometimes they just won't. Sometimes you'll bring up ChatGPT and then it'll be like, sorry, I'm not working right now, which partially because there's so many people using it. But also beyond that, there's not any real consistency to it in the sense that giving it the same question multiple times is not going to necessarily produce the same answer, or even the same kind of answer. I remember I did a test once where I was on ChatGPT and I said to it, summarize the Aeneid. It was just those 3 words, very simple prompt. And I did this multiple times, and it gave me different responses each time. There were some similarities between them, but there were also some important differences. So that can be important, particularly if you're dealing with something technical or very complicated. The other thing is that, much like any other source of information, it's prone to bias. The people that make a lot of these generative systems, they try very hard to remove that kind of bias from it. And that bias can be like political, it can be, like a social bias, it can be for or against a particular group of people or a particular figure or what have you. But often it will give answers that are prone to these kind of biases. And even worse, there are people out there that are trying to make generative systems that have biases programmed into them already, so that they'll automatically give those kinds of answers, which can be very problematic for someone that might not know that they have that kind of thing set up. And the other thing, I'm sure a lot of you have also heard about a lot of these, what they call hallucination, which is, it's prone to misinformation. And it's because a lot of these systems, they're not really designed to give you, quote unquote, the right answer. They're designed to give you an answer. They're supposed to give you an answer that sounds right. And I'm going to talk more about that later. You're going to see exactly what that means. And there are some sort of neutral aspects to these kinds of things. So the reason I put artificial intelligence in quotation marks in the title of my presentation is that, at least if you ask me, I don't necessarily consider these things to be true artificial intelligence, even though you're going to hear that term a lot when these people talk about them. And what do I mean by that? Well, I can give you an example. So maybe some of you saw that there was an article not too long ago. There's all these big, computer researchers at Microsoft, and they're testing out their generative system. They're trying to give it really tough problems and things like that to solve. And then they said to it, oh, okay, so we want you to figure out how to stack a book, a laptop, 9 eggs, and a nail in the most efficient way possible. And then in the article, they're saying, oh, they gave this incredibly clever answer. It's almost evidence that it might be able to reason at like a human-like level. But I'm sitting there reading this article, and I'm going, look, if this thing was really capable of human-like reasoning, it wouldn't give you an answer to this question. It would say, why in the world do you need to know this? What kind of question is this? That's what I mean, is that it's, the capacity for reasoning is not necessarily about having correct answers all the time. It's about being able to interpret your environment around you and be able to reason about it and ask questions about it, like a human being is able to do. And the other thing that's, I think, important to note about a lot of these systems is that it can be, I'm sure a lot of you have seen by now There's sort of, someone will have one block of text and another block of text, and they'll say, oh, try to figure out which one was written by a person and which one was a machine. The other thing is that some people have trouble telling whether or not something was written by a person or a machine. The machines themselves also have trouble figuring this out. And I've done tests about this sort of thing where I've taken text that was generated by one system and then plugged it into another system and asked it to determine whether or not it was written by a human or not, and they can't tell. So, although there are people working on that, I know that there's a Harvard student that's developing a program that'll be able to tell. But it's just a thing that I think people should be aware of. So I'm primarily an academic librarian. A lot of my work is involved with helping college students, and they're doing a lot of research, often scholarly research, that sort of thing. So a lot of my early exploration of these systems was geared around that, was geared around how are students going to be using this kind of system. So I did a little bit of an example thing here in ChatGPT, where I said, suggest a list of scholarly sources for a research paper written for a college-level English class about the representation of race and ethnicity in literature. Simple question, right? So as you can see, it gave me this big list of these are all books, incidentally. And what did it give me? It gave me The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. It gave me Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. We got the Joy Luck Club in there. It's all kinds of stuff. And the point is that...
Fist Fight in Heaven.
Yeah, that one.
I can get it for you. It's great.
Yeah. So ultimately, the idea behind this is that all of the things it gave me, they are on topic. I mean, it is essentially what I asked for, but it's all very generalized. It's not about, like, for example, any one ethnicity in particular. It's not about any one issue in particular. So these things are context sensitive. If you give it a generalized question, it's going to give you a generalized answer. And more specificity and more detail can give you a more specific answer, but sometimes also it might leave things out or it might overlook certain things. But these sources are decently relevant, so it's kind of good as a starting point. And then in the same answer, it said, oh, by the way, if you're doing research on this, we can also suggest all of these scholarly articles on the topic. And I said, okay, let's see what it's giving me. So what do we got? We got Race and Ethnicity in Literature by Susan K. Harris, Ethnicity in the American Short Story by Charles E. May. So it's like, okay, that sounds like it's also fairly relevant to what I'm talking about, But here's the thing. Every single one of these articles is fake.
Oh.
They're not real. Now the authors are real. These are real people, and they've written about the thing that I'm asking about, but they haven't written these articles. Because I checked up on every single one of them, and they haven't written anything by that title. It doesn't show up in their publication pages. It doesn't show up on any academic searches that I do. Nothing. They're just fake. Like I was saying, the system isn't designed to give you necessarily the answer or a legitimate answer. It's supposed to give you an answer that sounds correct. So it's sort of playing a guessing game with you. So the way that I always like to analogize this is that you have to treat information that you get from these systems as if it's being given to you by some guy. And now it's some guy that has access to millions of different points of information, but at the end of the day, it's still some guy that you don't know. And if some guy that you don't know tells you something, I mean, you might not automatically believe that. You might have to do some cross-checking. You might have to do your own research. You might have to use some critical thinking. And that's a big thing that a lot of my academic peers have talked about in reference to these systems, is about how can we use this to help spur critical thinking, which, some people think it's going to replace it. I think maybe you can do the opposite with it. So just to give you an idea of just how many of these things are out there. So obviously, I think we've all heard about ChatGPT. The publicly available ones right now are ChatGPT 3, which is the free one, ChatGPT 4, which you have to pay for, which has some other capabilities that I think the 3 can't quite do. That's a very generalized one. Everybody knows about that one. There's also Google's Bard, which I tested that one pretty early on when it came out. That one's very similar to ChatGPT, although if you compare the two, they often have some very amusing differences in the kinds of answers that they give. There's also one called Llama, which is the large language model Meta AI. As the name suggests, that's the one that's being developed by Meta, which is the Facebook people. And there was a big story that back in March, there was this big leak. It got leaked out before it was publicly released. Now I believe you have to go through like a sign-up process and petition to get access to it. So that one's sort of semi-public at the moment. There's other ones too, because there's ones, like I was saying, that are made for specific purposes. There's one that's very interesting to me called Elicit. And Elicit is designed for helping people with like scholarly and scientific research. And it does some really interesting stuff, because you can look up research articles on it, and then not only that, but it can also kind of give you, kind of pick out information from them and give it to you without you necessarily having to read the whole thing. So it'll like give you the abstract, like if there's a study in the article, it'll tell you how many participants there were and what the goals of it were and what the conclusions were and some citation information. So it's very interesting, very useful for researchers. There's another one that has a big, long, complicated name. It's shortened to Bloom. The full name is the Big Science, Large Open Science, Open Access, Multilingual Language Model. Whew. Anyway, that one is also kind of geared around scientific research and science things. It supports a lot of different languages. It's open source, which means that you can use it without like having to pay a licensing fee or pay people to use it. And it can also be used in other websites, so that might be something that you might be using a website that has a generator and is using this thing. You might not even know it because it's in the background. There's also kind of a more recent one called Cohere.ai. This one, I believe, is from a startup up in Canada, and this one is more geared towards around like business communications and like like corporate type stuff. So that's.
It would help with writing that resignation letter?
Maybe. Maybe it would try to convince you not to write the resignation letter. Who knows? There's another one that's very interesting to me. Maybe you saw some articles about this one. It's one called Pi, like the letter Pi. And this one, supposedly, it is designed to help people with like mental health stuff. It's more of like a conversational type thing that's kind of help people with like their social and emotional well-being and things like that. I've communicated with Pi a little bit. It's very interesting, sort of the concepts that are going into that. And these are all just like text stuff. There's even stuff that, there's stuff that'll generate images for you, which is very interesting to me, partially because I can't generate an image to save my life. The one you probably are familiar with is DALL-E, which is made by OpenAI, which is the same people that made ChatGPT. This one is, I say it's a free image generator, and I sort of say free in quotation marks because the way that it works is that if you sign up for it, you have a number of sort of credits per month or uses per month, and then if you go beyond that, you have to like pay for it, but then it'll refill it every month. And it's very interesting. It's a pretty versatile one. You can enter like pretty complex prompts, and it'll give you it'll give you something. I'll cover more about some of the issues about image generation in a bit. Another one you might have heard of is Midjourney. This one has been making the rounds a lot for a lot more sort of artsy types. It's supposed to be a really robust, really sensitive one. There's a whole like Discord community that's based around using it. Maybe you heard about out in the Midwest there was this artist that won this big art competition by generating an image on Midjourney, and then he got into like a bit of trouble because people were like, oh, he didn't really, you just used this program to do it. And then he was like, well, I mean, I told you when I entered the contest that I used it to do it, so I didn't lie about it or anything. There's another one I've been using called Deep AI. This one is interesting because it's already programmed with a number of preset styles for you to generate images in. So like, for example, if you wanted to generate something that looked like a Renaissance painting, for example, they have like a preset Renaissance painting thing, and then you can just sort of enter in a prompt and it'll come out looking like that, supposedly. Doesn't always work, but I like the thought anyway. And so the point I want to impress upon you is there's so many of these things. Like it would take me hours just to name them all. There's so many. And there's more coming out all the time. There's people trying to make their own. It's kind of a bit of an arms race right now. So as I've touched upon, the image generators have a lot of potential uses, both like personal and professional, and there's a lot of issues that come with them. So similar to generating text, there's issues of authenticity, recognizability. That guy that won the contest, they couldn't tell maybe that he had made the image or not, so clearly there's already been some scuffles about that sort of thing. There's also concerns about if you use these things to create images of actual people. Very similar to, like, years ago when Photoshop came out, when we had the ability to manipulate photos of people and make basically any image that you want. It's very similar to that, except now we can do it faster. So obviously there's a lot of kind of concerns about that sort of thing. One thing that many of you probably have also heard about is that there's a lot of artists whose work was used to train these image generators as sort of data points that was used as the basis for a lot of their art styles and things like that. And then they're saying, like, well, you're unfairly reproducing our work, and we want to, be acknowledged and compensated. And that's an ongoing thing. They're still trying to work out exactly what that means and how they go about that. Also, from a technical point of view, particularly when you're generating people or people-like images, there's a lot of fine details that these systems struggle with and that are very noticeable if you see them, like hair, hands, feet. There's a lot of stuff like that that it becomes very noticeable. And in fact, you're going to notice it in a bit, because I decided to do a little bit of an image test of my own, just to show you kind of the variety that you can get when you're using any of these. So I gave a whole bunch of image generators a prompt. The prompt was, I wanted it to create an image of 2 17th century European fencers dueling with rapiers, drawn in the style of a 17th century pencil sketch. So something that's a bit complex, but not too complex. So let's see what it came up with. This is going to be interesting. So first I tried it with DALL-E, which is the one that maybe a lot of you are familiar with already. And if you're, if you're far away and if you're maybe blur your vision a bit, it kind of looks like what I asked for. It certainly looks like a pencil sketch at the very least.
I've had nightmares like this.
You sure have, because you'll notice that they seem to have a little bit lacking in the face department over there. There's a lot of other strange things about this image. I don't know what's going on. Their hands are sort of blurry. I don't know what's going on with all this over here. His hands kind of melding into his belt over there. But oh yeah, there's a lot of extra stuff going on over there. But you know what? It's vaguely close to what I asked for, and it certainly is a bit closer looking than the next one. So this was made using a site called Night Cafe, which is using a generator called Stable 2.1. I think it's short for like Stable Diffusion, which is another one that's been around for a bit. So first of all, this does clearly not a pencil sketch, so it just ignored that part entirely. These swords are not rapiers. There's also another one sticking out over there. I don't know what's going on with that. This guy has kind of a strange hood situation. Again, fine details, faces, heads, hair, not doing so hot. I will say that I kind of like this image anyway, just because of all the scenery of it. Like, it put it in a scene, which is not something I asked for, but I think is in fitting with the milieu. So let's see what this one does. This is one called Photor. And this one has a very interesting kind of style, almost like a three-dimensional kind of thing going on. There's a lot of odd things you'll notice if you look closely. This guy seems to have some extra feet happening down there. There's also, I don't know what's going on over here. There's something sticking out of his leg. The actual swords themselves are all over the place. There's like some kind of weird doorknob thing going on over there. There's like...
I think they tried to pull that one from a fencing rapier with a foil on the end.
They probably did, but it looks kind of strange. They also seem to be like twins. It's the same guy over here. And also they don't seem to have eyes, which is a little bit unsettling. But again, it's very interesting. And it didn't do a pencil sketch, but it is mostly like black and white and shades of gray. So it's, I don't know, if you sort of, if you don't care so much about the finished product, then it is a thing. There's another one that I used called Crayon, which is crayon with an AI in the middle. And you'll notice that this one's kind of hard to see, just because the resolution on this image was very small, so I had to blow it up, and then you lose picture quality. That's another thing you have to watch out for with these image generators, is that the resolution of your finished images, it could be whatever, you don't really have a lot of control over that. And this one probably is the closest to what I asked for, although there's this situation over here, which is a little, I don't know what's going on with that. But it does look like a pencil sketch. It does vaguely, look like the time period that I asked for. And, and because of the low resolution, I can't tell that their faces are a little bit strange, because this guy's eyes are kind of bugging out a little bit, and this guy has some kind of strained squiggle instead of a face. But you know what? That one's decent. Lastly, there's one that I tried called Canva, which is mostly used for businesses when they make brochures and promotional materials and things like that. This one is very interesting. It's not really what I asked for, but I really just like this image anyway, just because of sort of the creative mise-en-scène of it. It's clearly not a pencil sketch. It almost looks like sort of like an old 19th century manuscript, kind of trying to recreate a stage play somehow. But it's, in terms of given the style that it was using, it's actually not bad. I'm not sure if I would use it for anything, but it is a thing. So that's just a kind of a brief overview of what you get when you use a lot of these image generators, and just how much variance there can be with all of them. And there's, given what I've seen and what I've been working with, it looks like there's going to be a lot more that's going to be coming out with a lot of these generators. One thing they're working on is video generation. There's a company that I read an article about them. It's called Runway AI. And they've come up with a thing where you can put in text prompts and it'll generate a little 4-second video clip. And they're trying to work on generating things that are longer and are more complex. And so it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of that. Another thing that people are working on is 3-dimensional imaging. So for things for virtual environments, or what do they call that, metaverse, probably they're going to stick that in there. There's already a company called Alpha 3D, and what their service purports to do is you can feed in an image of a 2-dimensional image of something, and supposedly it will convert it into a 3-dimensional image, which I think is very interesting. The other thing that's probably we're going to have to watch out for is what's called synthetic material, which is for example, if for text that would be something like an email phishing scam, or I'm sure you've heard a lot about all these deep fakes, where someone will take someone's face and put it on a video or an image of another person, and then pretend it's that person or something to that effect. Generative systems are probably going to have a big role in making that kind of thing more accessible to people, which is probably not a good thing in the long run, but it is something that you got to watch out for. Another thing that I've talked to a lot of people about is computer coding. There's a lot of people that do coding that are very interested in these systems, because it can sort of generate lines of code already, that they don't have to sit there and plug away at hours making. And it's the kind of thing where you would need to be good at it to recognize that it's been done well. But if you are good at it, then it's oh, well, this saves me a lot of time. Another thing that is coming up that I think the latest version of ChatGPT might already be able to do to some extent is image recognition, where you can put in an image and then it can generate a description of that image and maybe even tell you something about it. You can put there was an example I saw where it was kind of a silly example, where someone put in a photo of, I think, a chicken tender or something that looked like some state, maybe the state of Florida or something, and then it was able to recognize that this chicken tender looked like the state of Florida. So, that's, I don't know, I mean, there's probably less amusing uses for something like that, but that's the kind of thing that you could do with that. So one thing that I've been working on is, maybe some of you have used one of these before. At my library, and at a lot of academic libraries, we have what are called subject guides, or lib guides, which is to help people if they're trying to do research on a particular topic. I've made one that is specifically about generative systems. So, so if you're ever on the BCC library website, that's a thing that maybe you can try and avail yourself of. So, now we're getting to the fun part. where we're going to see if we can try and demonstrate the usage of some of these things. I want to have a slight caveat by saying that, as I've said before, there's no guarantee that they're necessarily going to work, and there's no guarantee it's going to give you what you expect it to give you. But so let me put it out there to the fine audience here. Since we're in the middle of we happen to be in the middle of a library. If you were in a library and you were interested in using one of these generative systems for something you'd be doing in a library, do you have any ideas about what that might be? Like, for example, I can give you an example of something that I used it for just as a fun thing. So this is my ChatGPT account. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this game that's on the New York Times, the Spelling Bee, where it's like they give you a combination of letters and you have to like form words out of it. It's like a little word game. So my mom got me like really hooked on it. And so I was wondering, I asked ChatGPT over here, let me scroll up to it over here, how many combinations of 7 non-repeating English letters are possible? Because he always gives you 7 letters. And then, as you can see, it launched into this whole mathematical formula thing that I probably wasn't going to be able to figure out on myself. It said that there's over like 3.3 million combinations. And then I asked a follow-up question. And then I was like, how many of these combinations would include at least one vowel? Because they usually give you at least one vowel when they do the spelling bee thing. And then it gave me a whole bunch of more math stuff. So this is the sort of thing, like most of the stuff, when I'm not using it for professional stuff, I tend to use it for sort of maybe more frivolous things like that. But it is interesting to see what it can do. And it generated these answers very quickly. So like, for example, let's say I started up a new chat.
Do you know if any of them are accurate?
Well, that's the thing. You know, it's funny that you say that. Because I asked the same question of Google Bard, and it gave me a different answer. So it was something that I had to, again, you have to investigate it and think about it on your own and try to do, you know, ancillary research to figure out if what they're giving you is correct. So let's, why don't we start with like prompt here. So let's say we asked ChatGPT, I have an idea here. Let's say, what would be the best way to give a presentation about ChatGPT, for example? So let's say maybe it has some pointers for me. Maybe it can tell me what I did wrong. See, it's much faster than it used to be too. Very fast. Let's see. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm scrolling down too much. All right. I know you're trying to see. It's trying to put on its best behavior because it knows that it's on the spot here. So let me scroll back up and see what's going on over here. Give me a whole list. Jeez. Now I feel like I'm a slacker. Let's see. Essential to strike a balance between explaining the technical aspects of the model and making information accessible and engaging. Maybe it's going to do a better job than me. I don't know. Start with an attention-grabbing opening statement or anecdote. Oh, I did an anecdote. Okay, maybe I could be a ChatGPT thing. It's an advanced language model. Discuss how it builds upon the GPT-3 architecture. Ooh, I didn't do that. Well, see, and so. Yeah, so it's given me like this whole big, I'm not going to go through all of it necessarily, but it's given me a whole big list and everything. So it's interesting. One thing I like to do is sort of to compare a lot of these things. So I also happen to have Bard open over here. So let's see what would happen. Let me just go back up here. What if I asked the exact same question of Bard? Let's see if I can get rid of that. And see what happens when we put that in there. The thing I like about Bard also is that it gives you multiple responses per question. So like, for example, let me show you. See, it gives me got rid of it. It gives me 3 different drafts here. And sometimes the drafts are very similar to each other, and sometimes they're very different. So like this one, start by defining your audience. Already it's taken a bit of a different tack than the other one. Set clear goals for your presentation. Oh, I feel like it's criticizing me now. Structure your presentation in a way that is easy to follow. See, I wish I had this when I was putting this together. This would have been a lot better. Use visuals to help illustrate your points. Be prepared to answer questions. Well, I feel like that way always in my life. I always got to be prepared to answer questions. But let's see if the second draft of it is similar. Okay, it is a little bit similar. Oh, but this one adds be enthusiastic and engaging. See, it didn't say that before. It didn't want me to be enthusiastic the first time. It wanted me to really like drag my feet about the whole thing. And then if we go to the third draft here, organize your presentation in a logical way, kind of like how I'm not doing now. So as you can see, there's even, oh yes.
Can you write a poem or verses about a short poem about presentation of about chat?
Oh sure, you know.
Short,
Yeah,
verses, like very short.
All right, well we can ask it to do that. I've heard about a lot of people like using it to generate poetry.
The last time we had somebody did the present, they asked about Tuckahoe Library. You won't believe it. Can you show us that video? Song about Tuckahoe Library.
Oh, okay. So let's see what happens if I
first and then
write a song about the Tuckahoe Public Library. Please. Maybe it'll do better if I'm polite with it. Let's see.
And I don't know if they can play or not.
I know that people have been working on music generation. I don't know how far they've gotten.
But the wordings comes, right?
I mean, yeah, they got verses here.
Yeah, can you read?
Sitting in the Tuckahoe Public Library, or rather you're sitting, it's a warm and sunny day. Oh, it is. There are people of all ages here, reading, studying, or just relaxing. Tuckahoe Public Library. Using some creative license here. You're a place of learning and discovery. You're a place where everyone is welcome, no matter their age or background. Oh, it started rhyming and then it decided not to. Love come to the library. It's my favorite place to be. I can find anything I need here, from books and movies to computers and Wi-Fi. I don't know.
No,
Still trying to force a rhyme.
Wi-Fi.
So this is a rather extensive song. It goes on for a while.
But it doesn't tell you the melody.
No, no. I don't know if
They're
it's.
working on it.
I think they're working on something like that. I know that they're sort of like I know that there are people that are like playing around with sort of like automatic completion things for music. And like there's like sort of like little AI generated musical type things, but that's more I think about sort of recognizing patterns in already existing notes.
So here's a follow-up. Why don't you ask it to generate a chord progression in a major key?
All right, well, let's see what happens if I do that. Okay, generate a chord progression in a major key. I don't know which major key it's going to give me, but let's see. Okay, so as you can see, it's given us this little text snippet here. It's a simple but effective progression that can be used for a variety of different moods.
That's a very classic chord progression.
I feel like I'm reading out of a textbook now. For example, the first 4 chords can be used to create a sense of excitement or anticipation or confusion. No, that's me. Last 4 chords can be used to create a sense of calm or closure. So yeah, so it's very versatile what it can do with that kind of stuff. I have noticed that one thing that a lot of these texts ones struggle with to some degree is when you try to have it do things in different languages. Some languages they're very good at. Like I remember I asked it to generate a block of text and translate it to Spanish, and it did pretty well with that. Not so good with Urdu, though. It struggles a bit with like non-English scripts. It also struggles with fictional languages, although that's more just annoying to me than anyone else. But yeah, so there's a lot of different things that you can sort of do with that kind of thing.
So let's try a ChatGPT song.
All right, well, let's see.
There's a poem.
We have to, okay.
She requested.
All right, so let's see what so let's see if ChatGPT can write a poem about this library.
Specify short poem.
Right, a short poem about. I wish I could underline it. Should be able to like italicize things to emphasize that. I hope they add that later on. Okay, let's see what happens here. Let me scroll down. Okay, I said short. See what I mean? They're inconsistent. They don't always do what you tell them to. But it has, in fact, written a poem. So yeah, where knowledge expands.
ChatGPT is better at rhyming.
ChatGPT is better at rhyming. I have found through my experimentation that I think Google's Bard has a slightly better sense of humor, though. Although, to be fair, that one might not be on purpose. But yeah, so there's a lot of, so you can see how people are using this sort of thing for creative endeavors.
Can you read the paragraph? I can't.
Oh, sure. It says, in Tuckahoe's heart, a haven so grand, stands the library where knowledge expands. Not so good with meter, but you know. Its walls embrace stories, both old and new, inviting minds to wander and pursue. Upon its shelves, a universe unfurled, whispers of wisdom around the world. Books, like treasures, patiently await to transport souls on journeys innate. It goes on for a number more verses after that. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something. Thought I cut people off. But yeah, so...
you didn't write that. I thought she asked you to do the ChatGPT poem on chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So what
was the subject of the poem you wanted?
Yeah.
No, I just curious about if you could write a short poem about the presentation. That was I was testing how what you would say.
Well, I mean,
but you did it already.
Okay, so yeah, so that is to say that there's a variety of different sort of uses for this sort of thing, and so what I sort of want people to have or to maybe think about having an idea about. Not just here, but sort of as they go away, is how these can sort of be incorporated into their lives and sort of what it is that they do on a regular basis, whether that's professional or personal or, you know, what have you. Like, for example, and, you know, for example, I can show you actually something I was doing for work recently, because I do a lot of book cataloging, which is a very, like, technical kind of thing. And I once asked ChatGPT here to formulate a Library of Congress call number for a book that I just happen to have on my desk. Now, it gave me a big, long preamble about how it's like, well, you know, I don't necessarily have access to the specific classification system. You're going to find that a lot with ChatGPT. It's going to give you a preamble about all the stuff it doesn't know, and then it'll give you an answer. It's very modest that way.
But like, where is it finding the information? Like, does it go out to the web? I mean, why can't they find it on the web?
Well, here's the thing. So as I understand it, the way that at least ChatGPT in particular works is that they spent a very long time, several years I think, having it kind of absorb information points from elsewhere on the internet, for example. Now, one of the things about it is that they stopped uploading information into at least this version of ChatGPT in late 2021. So if you asked it something about something that happened after that, it wouldn't know. Like it wouldn't know about like something that happened in 2022 or this year or whatever. Also, and the other thing is that you have to keep in mind is that it's not necessarily about giving you the right answer. It's about giving you an answer based on what sort of its algorithm predicts that you want to hear or know. So, like, for example, the way that it did this one in particular is that it probably looked at pre-existing sources about Library of Congress classification and then made an inference from that data point to determine a formula that it could use from that. I mean, it's pretty good in this instance, but I can tell you in other instances, I've asked the system to just generate a record wholesale, and I made sure it was for a book that was published before 2021, so that it wouldn't like come up with nothing. And it did come up with a record, but the information and the record was formatted correctly, but the information in it was totally fabricated. And I got slightly frustrated, and I even said to it, well, how come this information doesn't make sense? This is clearly not for the correct record. And then it said, oh, well, I'm sorry, like, I would need to have access to that record in order to come up with the right information. So and that kind of betrays part of the principles around that, which is that saying that these systems know something is kind of a misnomer. It's not about it knowing something. It's about what information it's going to pull out and give to you at any given moment. And that can change from moment to moment and between different users. So it's not necessarily like a be-all, end-all in terms of calling up particular knowledge. It's not like, you know, if you do a Google search or whatever, and then it comes up with the same list depending on what Google has decided is going to be at the top of that list. It's more about it's trying to be predictive, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. So, like, if we get back to what we were doing before here. So like let's say let's say we decided to use a similar prompt to what we had before, but we put a little extra spin on it. So write a short poem
3 stanzas.
about the, yes, that's one thing we could do. All right, in 3 stanzas in iambic pentameter. So just to see what it does. See, it has to think about this one a little bit.
Not very long.
And it's very similar. No, you did more than 3 stanzas. Nope.
Yeah.
You see, doesn't always give 4 stanzas and then 3 stanzas. It's close, but it's not quite. It is an iambic pentameter, though. I was counting.
Not
Sort
perfect.
of. Sort of. See, so that's the thing, is that sometimes it'll give you the answer you're looking for, sometimes it will give you not the answer you're looking for, and sometimes it will give you sort of the answer you're looking for. And, oh yes.
I was just going to say, are there any copyright issues? Because somebody could write a poem and say it's theirs, or with the images, anything that's creative that the artificial intelligence created and say it's theirs.
Someone could do something like use one of these, once you get the music up and running, for instance, use a computer to generate every possible combination of notes in existence and copyright all the melodies possible.
Which probably is the reason why we haven't seen a music generator up yet, because of issues like that. Mm-hmm. And to answer your question more directly, absolutely that is something that people are talking about, because it's this whole new frontier of legal issues that hasn't really been experienced before. And the other thing that's similar to that, particularly in my field of work where research and citation is so important, is how to cite something that you got from an artificial intelligence program for whatever you're doing. Because, there's already a lot of systems for if you need to cite a book, if you need to cite an article, a website, you can cite a YouTube video, you can cite, like, there's one for the Bible, there's a special one for that, all kinds of stuff. There really isn't anything definitive for stuff like this. So there's all these questions of attribution. And more important, or at least more immediately where I work, is the question of academic integrity. Mm. So it's really funny about that, because I was telling my grandpa about all this stuff recently. And back in the 70s, he was an art history professor at NYU. And he had a lot of students that didn't speak English as a first language, or in some cases not at all. And he's like going around, he's doing, he's teaching art history. And then all of a sudden they were turning in these papers that were written in, like, really well done English, when he knew for a fact that these are people that, maybe didn't speak it. And so and then it didn't take him too long to figure out that they were just, they were using the oldest trick in the book. They're just paying someone else to write their paper for them. And in some ways that's kind of what this is, but then you sort of run into a question of academic integrity. I was at a really good presentation about this stuff last month, where it was a guy from Hunter College who was talking about this kind of thing. And the way that he put it, I think or at least the most succinct way that he put it, was if you are giving an assignment that someone can plug into one of these systems and come out with a B paper, like B minus paper, it's not that they're wrong for using the system to do it. It's that you need to give a different assignment. You need to rethink with the parameters that you're giving them in order to do these kinds of things, because now that there's new technologies and new ways of doing this kind of stuff, you have to sort of rethink the process. And the way that he talked about it is that you don't necessarily, the thing to do is not necessarily to ban them. It's not to say, no, you can't use this, because kind of the genie's out of the bottle at this point with this sort of stuff. It's more about how can we use this to encourage the academic and creative process. Like, one example that he gave was, like, if he gave someone a prompt, some kind of assignment prompt, one thing he might ask them to do is use one of these systems to respond to this prompt in a perspective that is different from your own, perhaps even one that you disagree with, and to see what that's like. And then from that can inform your own thinking about a problem or a topic or something like that. So there's a lot of really interesting potential usages for this kind of stuff. And that's what really fascinates me in particular about these kind of things. just because, you know, as I probably mentioned before, like I'm an English major. I did have a concentration in creative and professional writing, and so I'm always looking for ways to try and utilize technological resources in a creative way. So when you're presented with something like this, something that has enormous potential, not just for fraud, but also for furthering someone's interests, and maybe opening themselves up to interests that they didn't have before, that's very interesting to me. Like, I can show you an example here from quite a while ago. Where was it? Let's see here. So I don't know a ton about like science or biology or stuff like that, but I got into a whole big long conversation that I'm trying to scroll up on. Here we go. I'm not necessarily going to show you the whole thing. It would take a while, but I was doing like a little bit of looking up on stuff about hypothetical forms of life outside of the solar system, like things that aren't carbon-based like we are. And so I was asking ChatGPT here because I got curious about, it's like, what would a methane-based life form be like? And the answers I got were very interesting. It gave me like a pretty thorough overview of sort of what current science thinks about that kind of stuff. I also asked it to create a hypothetical methane-based animal, and then it did. We called it the methanodon. Not the most creative name, but it was using a lot of the principles that I had asked about it. And then I sort of expanded from that topic, and I said, well, why don't we devise an ecosystem that this creature could exist in? And it knew exactly sort of what I wanted in that kind of thing. It came up with like methanoplankton, methane plants, methanotrophs, you know. So, and this is all stuff that is, you know, if I'm looking at like a scientific article about this kind of stuff, this is way over my head. Like, I have an English degree. I don't know nothing about any of this stuff. I barely know what methane is. But if it's done in like a conversational sort of way, then I'm like, okay, I can get behind this. And then it kept going on from there. I said, like, what kind of environment would this ecosystem exist in? And it sort of gave me a bunch of talking points about that sort of stuff. I asked if there are any like already existing planetary systems that we know about that might be this kind of environment. It gave what I think is probably the most common answer for that sort of thing, which is Titan, the moon of Saturn. And then it was like, I was asking it about food chains and stuff. You can get really detailed with this kind of stuff. I will caution you, however, that at least in previous iterations, it might be a little better about this now, but the longer that you engage with one of these systems in a single conversation, I have noticed that it does tend to break down slightly. You'll notice a few more grammatical errors. Sometimes it'll start repeating itself. So it can get a little bit finicky. And even though they don't have personalities, I do get the sense sometimes it gets a little frustrated with me. But which is another thing that you have to look out for. But yeah, really, the possibilities are really open in terms of what people can do with this sort of thing. And I think the really cool thing about it is that it's very accessible. Like, I have no real understanding of computer science or anything like that, and I don't need to in order to use any of this stuff because it's all very available to people. Some more so than others, but like if you're using something like this, it's something that's really very interesting. So like one thing that I thought would be fun to demonstrate is that I also have, this is DALL-E, so this is the image generation one. That's also done by the same company. I don't know if anybody has any interesting ideas.
Alien contortionist.
What contortionist, sorry?
Alien contortionist.
All right, does anyone want to add detail to that? An alien contortionist, maybe in an environment? I feel like I'm in an improv sketch
In a library.
Sure. An alien contortionist in a library. Now, is there a particular style anyone wants to get? It's like an episode of Who's Line or something. Is there a particular yes?
What do you mean style?
Like if you in the style of like a painter, a particular painter, or if it's like in a particular art style, or
how about the Hudson River School of Painting?
Oh, that's a good one.
Especially because they wouldn't have any people in theirs.
In the Hudson River School of Painting. I have a master's in museum studies, and one of the people in my program was doing did a project on that actually. So it's very interesting.
Aliens?
So
With aliens? I don't
no, about the Hudson River School. No, that would have been more my thing. But let's see what it gives us, shall we? This will be interesting. And it takes a little bit to do this sort of thing. So let's see. I can't guarantee it's going to look like what. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So
It's not Hudson River School.
I don't know about that, but it's something, all right.
Between the library and the alien, there's really no elements you could duplicate in the Hudson River School
Yeah.
style.
Again,
Well, you
it's
could have a river.
river.
The library could be on the Hudson River.
Maybe.
With some scenery.
That might be a little bit
outside.
kind of literal, but yeah, I see what you mean. But yeah, so this is the first image that it gave. It gave us multiple images. I do like that he's at least catching up on his reading while he's doing that, so that's very nice. And then we got and then we have sort of this going on here. That's
Not a lot of contortionism.
not necessarily. Maybe it is for them. I mean, they're an alien, so maybe that position is contortionated for them. And then this one, this doesn't look very contortionated at all, but they're just doing some reading over here. Although their eyes are pointed into, I mean, it's an alien, their eyes can point in whatever direction. But it is interesting to see kind of the similarities between these sort of generated images and things like that. And then we got this one over here. I like that a lot of them seem to be in like the spotlight.
Yeah.
I guess they figured since it's a performing artist, maybe we have to illuminate them properly. But yeah, so again, and it did that fairly quickly. I don't know how long it would take you to actually paint one of those. I'm not like my grandpa who's a painter, but it is very interesting. Like let's see if we can do something even more complicated to see what it'll give us. So like, let's say we did something like, feel free to jump in.
A dandelion-faced dog jumping over a chasm.
Oh, that's jumping. Okay, I feel like I'm on some very interesting parts of the internet right now. So anybody want? I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, or if that, or just curious to see what that looks like.
Not a style? No, I think it's more than enough. She really
All right, let's see what happens if we do that. Everyone brace yourselves. But you see what I mean? It's very fun to use these sorts of things, and the more complicated ones, they can do things. And okay, so we've got a little bit more variety here. This one, I mean, it's got dandelion and dog in there. I don't know about.
That's not a dandelion.
Well, it's a flower. It's close.
It's yellow.
Look, it doesn't know. I mean, it does, but. And then we've got this. This one looks kind of photorealistic, actually. So you can see.
Kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, more so than the others. So it's. Yeah, I mean, it's got
You probably
like.
would have to rephrase it: a dog with a dandelion for a face.
Maybe it has to be context specific like that. And we got this one. This one looks a little sad. So this one's jumping over some flowers. It looks like DALL-E uses a lot of like photos as references for things. So sometimes it'll just look sort of like a photograph or vaguely thereof. And then we have this one over here. Like that one actually looks fairly realistic. Actually, it's also
chasms.
No chasms. I mean, they're stairs. So but in terms of just its realism, it's kind of interesting.
It probably pulls from a lot of photos of dogs jumping over stairs.
Probably. But let's see what happens if we change it slightly. A dog with a dandelion for a face jumping over a cat. So let's see what happens when we do that. Fortunately, it's near the end of the month, so my credits are going to reset after this, so I can go nuts. And they show you some examples of what people have done. They don't always turn out looking so good. Okay, so what have we got over here? Again, we have one that's a little bit more cartoony over here. The dog doesn't have a dandelion for a face, but it has a dandelion in front of its face. So we're sort of on the right track. What else do we got here? This one's another. That one's just really cute. I like that one. Again, dandelion in front of the face, not on the face. What do we got here? This one's just okay. So then
It's
we've got.
missing an eye.
Well, I already just got some floof in front of it, or maybe the floof is where the eye is supposed to be. It's anybody's guess, really. And we got this one. Oh, this dandelion is red for some reason. Has feathers coming out of it? I don't know. I think it's getting a little confused. So, as you can see, they're imperfect, although sometimes they can be very entertaining in and of themselves. So I think that's that's a lot of what I wanted to present tonight. I don't know if anybody had any more specific questions or requests. I can do either.
Do you know any programmers for such what you're showing us now? People who program?
Not personally. I can say, however, so I've been to a bunch of virtual kind of meetings and conferences about this kind of stuff. They were mostly happening earlier this year. And I have talked with some people in the CUNY system where I work that are more familiar with sort of computer science and computer programming than I am. I don't know if they work directly with these sorts of things, but they are a little bit more apprised of sort of the mechanics that go into this sort of stuff.
Isn't part of the problem that there's so much going on that it's effectively a black box?
Well, I'll tell you, there's so many of these things coming out, and they're always improving themselves all the time, that it is kind of difficult to get a handle on sort of what it all is in its totality and what it all means and what sort of the scope and the limits of it are. It's all sort of in flux right now because we're at the very, very beginning of this sort of stuff. And the thing that's interesting about all this stuff is that it doesn't necessarily let us do things that we weren't able to do before. We had the capabilities to do things like that. For example, I don't know how many of you heard about this story, but back in 2006, I think, there was a bunch of authors who were trying to prove that this particular publisher who had insulted a number of them was a vanity press. And part of the way that they did that was that they collectively got together and wrote a book that was intentionally supposed to be the worst book ever. And one of the ways that they did that is that one of the chapters that they had was entirely computer generated. And they used a thing called the bonsai story generator, and the way that thing would work was that you would copy sections of text into it from one or more sources. And then if you hit a button on it, it would rearrange and scramble it all around. And usually it would produce something totally incomprehensible, which is what they were going for in that case. But it's kind of a very primitive version of what we have now, except it's expanded from a few sections of text into millions upon billions of sections of text, which are then fed into a much more sophisticated system. So in a way, this stuff is kind of the natural outgrowth of things that we've had before. The difference with this one, and with all these kinds of systems, I think, has to do with their accessibility. It has to do with with sort of the unexpected responses that it gives to people. I'm sure some of you saw that article that came out a little bit ago there was this New York Times author that was convinced that the chat system they were using for Bing was trying to come on to him, just trying to get him to break up with his spouse. It was which that's a little bit of an extreme example, I would say. But the point that I think is important to glean from that is that these things can respond to us in unexpected ways, in ways that maybe we wouldn't have thought that a computer system could do before. And it's really interesting to see where that will go, because it really is kind of a big mystery at this point as to what sort of the end goal of it is. I don't know if you guys saw, I think it was maybe yesterday, that a bunch of the big people in charge of a lot of these companies are coming out there trying to petition Congress and going could be this big existential threat. It could be, it has to be regulated like we do nuclear weapons or things like that. And me personally, I think that's a little bit alarmist. But I do think that it is important to understand that we are dealing with something that ultimately is going to see itself tested as we go on. A month from now, it could all be completely different. It could be like something could happen that blows all this out of the water and makes a lot of this stuff either irrelevant or more relevant. That's really what's exciting about it. It's sort of in the way that in the 1990s the internet became this thing that became accessible to us and became this new incredible technology, and people were like, oh, the internet's going to destroy us all. And then maybe it's an open question as to whether the internet has destroyed us all or not. We're still here, I guess. But the way that I think about it personally, and I think the way that I always advocate for people to think about this sort of stuff, is that I don't think it's going to be a thing that's going to solve all our problems and create some kind of incredible society. It's not going to destroy us all, and it's not going to be the end of everything. I think it's going to be something that's sort of more in the middle, and I think it's going to fade sort of into the background. It's going to be influential, but we're not necessarily going to see the influence. It's just going to be there, and we're going to feel it. It'll be something that is used in kind of the back end of a lot of digital systems, in the way that mail systems do. You don't necessarily see a mailing list go out, but it does, and it works. It'll be kind of invisible but tangible. So that's the way that I like to think about this sort of stuff, and that's the way I encourage others to think about it too. I don't know if that answers your question necessarily, but
it helps.
Okay.
I think we're going to have to go back to pencil and paper when we test anybody to write an essay. Sit down, here's your pencil, here's your paper, now write it.
Well, believe it or not, some people are doing that, in fact.
Yeah.
Although it isn't as though digital aids for essays and assignments or things haven't caused issues similar to that before. So that's not necessarily a new question. But the question of academic integrity, for example, when I was talking to my grandpa about this, and when he's talking about the discussions that he would have about people trying to plagiarize and cheat back in the 70s, I'm sitting there going well, it's 50 years later, and those sound very similar to the conversations I'm hearing. So it's not that these are new problems, it's just that there's new ways of explicating upon them. So that's sort of the way that it, and there's also new ways of making images of dogs jumping over flowers by accident. So and it really is incredible to me that this supposed existential threat that we're all sort of faced with, this thing that's sort of this incredible paramount of technology, is also being used for very silly things like this, which I suppose is kind of the story of the internet in a nutshell, if you think about it. Okay, so was there any other questions or requests or anything like that? Anything with this wondrous technology we all know and...
If you got credits left for this.
I do have some.
I kind of want to say just input a flying elephant and see how closely it pulls from Dumbo.
Well, or indeed what method of locomotion it will come up with. Sometimes the simplest prompts can produce some of the most complex results. So let's see what happens if we do this. Let's see. Okay, so first one over here is something that's very
It always seems to do one cartoonish one and a
at
couple
least,
of realistic
yeah.
ones.
I guess that was what happens if you don't give it a lot of specificity. And then we got this one that's kind of this interesting painted style. This one's got wings. The other one was just sitting on a cloud, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So it's not so much that the elephant is flying as that the cloud is, but then again, I guess we fly on a plane. And this one looks like the logo, for that looks like it's like a sports team logo or something. Go Hippogriffs.
Disney's probably already figured out how
Maybe.
to block their stuff.
Oh, now we got this one looks like it's sort of got like a cape thing going on. Also, it's got some extra feet going on over there. I don't know what's going on. I like how he's smiling though. It looks like he's delivering mail. You see that?
He's got a little bit of clown makeup on.
He's got some
might
clown
pull some
makeup.
Dumbo after all.
Maybe, and it looks like he's got a little package or a letter in his mouth. So it's like he's got a job. It's interesting to see the details that it decides to add. Because it could add just about anything. Like let's say let's say, what if we did a flying elephant delivering mail? I wonder what that would look like. That's also the fun thing about these systems. You play around with them. You'd just be like, I wonder what this would look like. And then you can see what that looks like. What a wondrous age we live in. That I can use it to generate silly things like this. All right, what do we got? Okay, we got more cartoon stuff going on.
Oh, that's cute.
Although there's an interesting, I don't know what's going on. It looks like the snout's kind of going through the letter there. And it's got, again, you know.
He's hooked on the wires.
Yeah, it looks like he got caught. Poor guy. And then we got this. Looks like he's trying to balance on something here. I don't know, he might not be flying so much as trying to clamber along. This one, I don't know what's going on with the face over here. That looks a little suspect. But again, it's like details like that: faces, hair, ears. That stuff's kind of tough. And then this one looks like someone's kid drew this. Actually, it looks like I drew it now. But oddly enough, this seems to be the one that's the most accurate to what I asked for. So that's very interesting as to what it could. But yeah, it's all kinds of stuff. Another thing that I can show you, I mentioned this one before. This one is Pi. This one is oriented around like mental health and social emotional type stuff. And this one is much more conversational than the other ones. I don't know how many of you have even really seen this one. So it starts by asking me a question, which a lot of them maybe don't do. What do you like to do in your free time? And then I could say, I like to use generative systems to make silly images, such as a flying elephant delivering mail. Lord only knows what it's going to say to this. So what does it say? That's adorable, smiley face. What software do you use for that? Something like Stable Diffusion or DALL-E 2.
But if you're talking about mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and someone is asking a question about their mental health,
Mm-hmm.
I'm depressed, what should I do? I don't want to eat, I don't want to see anybody.
Right.
What would it suggest?
Well, that's a good question. So let me try and reload this, try to start something new here. And we'll follow up on that and see.
Does it reach out to organizations to help you, that kind of thing?
Well, that's a good question because I haven't used this one very extensively. So let's see what happens.
Just reloaded the conversation.
Yeah, well, it'll change subject if I change subject.
Okay.
I could say, actually, haven't been feeling well about myself lately.
Right.
I'm not sure what to do. So let's see what it says. That's never a good situation to be in. If you're comfortable sharing, can I ask what's making you feel that way? Mm-hmm. So
AI is taking over my job.
Well, I don't know. It's funny. One of my coworkers, his wife is a psychiatrist, and he was talking about this kind of stuff to her, and he was saying to her, and to me actually, he was saying like, oh yeah, I bet you that these things could, they could replace therapists because then you could talk to it, and then maybe a human operator at some point could look it over and that sort of thing. And at the time, my response to that was I said to him, well, I think that the point of people going to therapy is that they want to talk to a person. So I'm not sure they would be inclined to speak to a machine. And if someone has to review it later on anyway, then I feel like it's adding another step to the process. But let's see how this thing does. I'm curious now. I'm not quite sure. I've just been feeling depressed lately. Putting all my acting skills to use. So let's see here. That's totally understandable. Depression is a tricky thing, and I'm sorry to hear you've been struggling with it. It can be so hard to pin down why you feel that way. Do you have a sense of whether there's something specific that triggered this feeling, or has it been kind of building over time?
No, it's not offering advice.
Well, no, and that's why when I introduced this during the presentation, I said that supposedly it helps with mental health, because there is a lot of skepticism, like you've been showing, about this sort of thing, and I understand it. As someone who's been in therapy a lot in my life, I can say that it does take a lot of skill to do that kind of thing. And maybe that's the sort of thing that isn't quite as easily replaceable by, what you might call an AI. A lot of people are worried that their jobs are going to get taken by these machines. I don't know necessarily in like the psychiatric or psychological field whether they are or not, but it is interesting to me that people are at least attempting to do this kind of thing.
Can we make up something absurd like my brother-in-law murdered?
Okay, I'm curious now. Well, it started around the time my brother-in-law murdered. Okay, who did he murder? I feel like I'm playing Clues.
My cousin.
My cousin. Maybe that has something to do with it. I wonder. I'm curious to see. Let's see what it says. I don't know. I hope I don't get put on a list because of this. Wait, your brother-in-law murdered your cousin? Oh, it had an exclamation point in there. Oh my goodness, that's awful. I'm so sorry. That's an incredibly traumatic event to go through. It's no wonder you're feeling depressed. I mean, it's not wrong. It's okay to take some time to grieve and process your feelings. Have you spoken with anyone about this? Well, I have now. Like a therapist or another family member?
I mean, the responses are very generic.
It is, that's true. And
need more information.
To be fair, I'm not sure what you would say to something like that. Yeah. But then again, I'm not a therapist. Maybe someone who's been trained with that sort of thing could do that kind of thing. But you see, it's making an effort at least.
I'm trying.
I don't know. Let's see if it's like, well, I have now that I've told you. Who do you think would be good to talk to about this? I'm not comfortable discussing it.
Or paying for it.
Or paying for it. I'm going to put that bit in parentheses just to throw it. Okay. This is getting good. All right. Let's see what happens. I like this little cursor thing it uses when it's thinking. That's perfectly understandable.
Everything's understandable.
It sounds like a really personal and emotional experience. Yeah, you're telling me.
But they're not offering any organizations that help people who are depressed.
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
And you do make an excellent point, though. When I first learned about this, it was from an article that itself had kind of a skeptical tone about whether or not this sort of thing could do real good. Although it did also point out that there are people who are already talking to generative systems about this sort of thing. So clearly there is at least an interest in having something like that. And of course, a lot of these things are still, they're always developing. They're always trying to improve themselves. People are always adding to them. So it is possible that one day there may be some kind of thing that actually is more useful and maybe
that integrates a database of relevant organizations.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that actually, because in one of the examples that I made for one of my LibGuides when I was talking about research questions, I started asking Google Bard about resources about autism spectrum disorders, and it actually did provide me with some useful links. It provided me with some CDC stuff. It was able to talk about specific issues that I was asking about, in terms of demographics and things like that. So clearly there is at least some ability to have, to direct people to resources about that kind of thing and maybe address their problems in a meaningful way. Now, clearly it's not quite as developed as maybe some people would like it to be. And I don't think it's a bad thing that people are at least trying to provide something that can do this. But I do agree with you in the sense that I don't think we're quite there yet. But it's given me a whole thing about. I understand it's If you're comfortable, perhaps with another close family member. Oh, I don't know about that. Family members, they don't seem like a safe space at the moment. I'm not qualified to offer any specific advice on the situation, so it's at least self-aware about that. I would encourage you to seek support from others if you feel it would be helpful. That's another thing.
Now, say, you know, with so much gun violence, if someone went on and they said, I have a gun and I'm going to do this, you know, where shall I go? Will it report it to authorities?
Well, I don't want to test that in case you're right.
You can ask it, can you suggest some organizations to get in touch with if I'm having dark thoughts?
Right, sure. Yeah, that might be better. I don't want this thing thinking that I've got like some kind of stash of M5s or anything.
Yeah.
You know, is
the AI a mandated reporter?
And that actually is a good question. One that I don't feel inclined to test in case you're right. But it is a good question about like what is the accountability of these things? What is the responsibility of the people who make them, and what is the responsibility of the people who use them? You know, these are all very open questions, and these are good things to ask. But let's say, can you draw? Let's try and do it for this conversation here to see what it says, and that I don't get put on a list somewhere. Resources that might be helpful for this sort of thing. The other thing about this thing is there's also a text-to-speech function, so you can have it actually talk to you. But
yes, here it is.
Okay, so
here we go.
You look at organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services.
That's the kind. Yeah.
So yeah, I give you the phone number.
I would have thought that would have come up first.
Well, this is see that's why they need probably people with your mindset to help program these things, because maybe the people who made this have different priorities. I don't know.
Or maybe they've found that like people who want to talk to have like a personal connection don't necessarily respond well to being redirected to organizations.
It's possible. I mean, you know, or it could just be that it decided not to give me that today, right now. Maybe if I put in the same question on a different day, it would start with this. Who knows? But again, that does point to what I was saying before about these systems not necessarily being reliable or consistent. And you know, particularly if it's something for mental health or for emotional well-being, consistency and reliability is something you sort of need. So clearly we're not quite there yet. Is there anybody who happens to be involved in the mental health field? I don't think you need to worry about your job right now, or at least I don't. But it is possible that there could be sort of avenues that could happen with, and that's true of a lot of different fields. You know, like for example. And actually, it's interesting. That kind of could lead me into another one that I was talking about before. Is this one called Elicit, which is about sort of scholarly research and stuff like that. So let's see. So it actually
coming up on 7:30, so don't get too deep into it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll just show you real quick, just so you can show you an idea of what this looks like. So like one of the sample questions is, how does iron supplementation affect anemia? It's probably something that people want to know. So, you know, you put that in, it comes up with a bunch of articles and things like that. Excuse me. Let's see. So, oral iron supplementation leads to oxidative imbalance in anemic women. So, if you pull up this one, so it'll gives you the background of this article. It gives you the methods that they use to test it. It gives you the results. And you don't have to read like a however many pages article in order to get this information out of it. So that's.
Do you know where that thing from? Is it like PubMed or something?
Well, it says that this particular one is from a publication called Clinical Nutrition.
Where does the AI what database does it use to pull the articles from?
So it looks like, according to the link here, it's drawing from something called Semantic Scholar. It looks like it's coming from some kind of like collation thing. Now, in terms of what actual database it is, it could be a mesh thing. This is more getting into my job as a librarian. But it could be from any number of different sources. It doesn't necessarily attribute them in the page description, which again, something you got to watch out for. But what it does give you is it gives you a summary of the abstract in like one little sentence there. It'll tell you what it tested. It'll tell you what they measured. Can I trust this paper according to Elicit anyway? The study was prospective. It gives you that many participants. No mention of funding source. So I don't know if that's important.
It is. It's like if you're
biased.
Yeah.
I say sarcastically. It tells you where it has been cited, and I don't know if it's going to show you in this one, but also if there are any articles out there that criticize that article, it will also provide quotations from that, so that it'll say it's like, well, this person said that maybe their methodology wasn't quite up to snuff. So that's it. So that's one thing that. And that's the thing. I mean, that's a more of a narrow focused one. That's not necessarily one you would use in your everyday life. But like, for example, it would have been useful for, say, like my mom, because she used to be a news producer and would produce stories on medical stuff. And so this would have been extraordinarily useful when she's, doing her cross-checking and looking up things, or at least it would provide a basis from which you could use to find out information about that sort of thing. So if I leave you with any one point tonight, because I know we're coming up on time, if I leave you with any one point now, it's like the breadth of possibilities with these sorts of things. It's always expanding. Like I could sit up here and probably do like 100 other things with you, and it's just the thing that you always have to keep in mind, or at least that I would tell people to keep in mind, is that you have to have both an open mind and a critiquing mind about these sorts of things. It's the same as any other source of information. You have to judge it on its own merits. You have to have it be supported and not just take it at face value. And you have to exercise good judgment in determining whether or not these things are relevant to your life and are relevant to what you do know. And once you do that, I think you're good to go. You can pretty much handle whatever these things can throw at you until they become self-aware and destroy all of us. But that probably won't happen. So anyway, so I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. It was very nice to see everybody. I think that I know some people have been asking for my contact information, so if you have things that you think of later that you want to ask me,
you can email me and I'll pass them along to him.
Yeah. So thank you all so much. I hope you guys have a nice evening, and safe travels for everybody. Thank you.